The verdict is out, and Argentina is crying. 10 players have allegedly been banned from international football in what is being described as one of the harshest decisions FIFA has ever taken against a single national team. Not 3 matches. Not 9 matches like Luis Suarez received. The claim is that some of these players could be excluded from international football permanently. And what makes this story so explosive is not only the punishment itself, but who is connected to the decision. Because the same man who publicly praised Argentina as an example for world football just weeks ago is now being associated with a disciplinary decision that could destroy the international careers of 10 Argentine players. If these claims are confirmed, this isn't simply another football controversy. It could become one of the most shocking disciplinary battles in modern football. Depending on which side you're on, what you're about to hear could make you furious or incredibly proud. So stay until the end because we're going through everything. We're going to look at the statement Gianni Infantino reportedly made about Argentina before the disciplinary process began, and why those words now sound completely different. We're going to compare the alleged punishment with the famous Luis Suarez case from 2014 and explain why supporters of Argentina believe the comparison exposes a huge problem with FIFA's decision. We're also going to look at the reported reaction from AFA President Claudio Tapia, the alleged message from Lionel Messi, and the legal route that could potentially give Argentina a chance to challenge the ruling. There is also one important disciplinary provision that could become critical if the appeal moves forward. And according to the source material, the deadline is approaching quickly. So let's go back to the beginning. Knowing that a punishment could be severe is one thing. Actually seeing what the alleged decision says is something completely different. According to the original report, the ruling contains language that would make these sanctions different from anything Argentina has experienced before. The claim is that some of the punishments are permanent. If that is accurate, it would represent an extraordinary development in FIFA disciplinary history. But before we continue, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next update. And I want you to answer one question in the comments. Justice or revenge? Because that is ultimately what this entire controversy is about. To understand how this situation reached this point, we have to go much further back than the final incident. According to the narrative presented in the source material, this story did not begin when Paredes grabbed Garcia during the post-match confrontation. It began years earlier. One of the first chapters goes back to the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. According to the original story, FIFA opened a disciplinary case involving Argentina and eventually imposed a financial penalty without individual suspensions. Then came another controversial episode during the current tournament. The Argentine players were allegedly involved in a dressing room incident involving references to the Falklands, and the case was reportedly closed without major individual punishment. Then there was Atlanta. 5 Premier League players were allegedly involved in a controversial display that attracted international attention, while FIFA reportedly waited several days before formally opening a disciplinary procedure. 3 opportunities. 3 moments when FIFA could have drawn a clear line. According to the argument being made here, the organization chose not to do it. Then came the 4th opportunity, and this time everything was different. It happened after the biggest match possible, the World Cup final. Cameras were everywhere. The confrontation was allegedly recorded from multiple angles. Physical incidents were visible, and pressure was reportedly growing for FIFA to take serious action. The argument now being made is that FIFA finally decided to respond with maximum force. And that brings us to the word at the center of this entire controversy. Permanent. There is also a number that supporters of this argument are using to explain the bigger picture. For disciplinary cases involving Argentina over a 4-year period. From Qatar in 2022 to the alleged decision dated August 14, 2026. For cases, the source claims that no other major national team had accumulated the same disciplinary record during that period. Brazil allegedly had 1. France had none. Spain had none. England had none. And Argentina, according to this narrative, had 4. The argument is that every time the players believed there would be limited consequences, the next controversy became bigger. The fine in Qatar. Another case in the dressing room. Another controversy involving the Atlanta incident. Another delay. And eventually the situation allegedly reached a breaking point. According to the source material, the FIFA Disciplinary Committee issued its decision on August 14, 2026, approximately 26 days after the World Cup final. And the punishments described are extraordinary. Paredes is allegedly given a permanent prohibition from representing any national team in FIFA competitions, based on disciplinary provisions concerning aggression and conduct capable of damaging the reputation of football. Molina is described as receiving a similar permanent international ban. Ayala is allegedly punished in his capacity as a team official. Almada reportedly receives a 5-year suspension. Then there are the players connected with the controversial flag incident. Lisandro Martinez, Christian Romero, Nicolas Otamendi, and Enzo Fernandez are described as receiving 24-month international suspensions, with the possibility of additional consequences depending on other proceedings. Emiliano Martinez is reportedly given an 18-month international suspension because of statements allegedly considered inconsistent with FIFA's sporting values. 10 players, 1 disciplinary case. And according to the original narrative, an entire generation of Argentine football has been hit by a single decision. But statistics and legal articles don't capture the human side of the story. Think about the ages of these players. Paredes is reportedly 29. Under normal circumstances, he could potentially have 2 more World Cups ahead of him. One in 2030 and possibly another in 2034 if his body and career allowed it. Those opportunities could disappear if a permanent international ban were actually imposed. Molina is younger. Emiliano Martinez is already in his 30s. And that distinction matters because this isn't about club football. These players could still play for their clubs. They could still train, compete, earn contracts, and build their careers. The issue is the national team, the blue and white shirt, the anthem, the World Cup, the one part of a footballer's career that money cannot simply replace. And that is why the alleged statement from Gianni Infantino has become such an important part of the story. According to the original script, Infantino praised Argentina shortly after the final, describing the team as representing some of the deepest values of football. He spoke about passion. He spoke about competition. He spoke about Argentina's influence on the sport. But then, according to the same narrative, disciplinary proceedings were initiated. And only weeks later came the alleged punishment. That creates an obvious question. How can a team be publicly praised as an example of football culture and then become the target of one of the harshest disciplinary actions imaginable? That contradiction is now being presented as one of the central issues in this controversy. And then came the reaction from Argentina. AFA President Claudio Tapia is reportedly preparing an appeal to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. The alleged response describes the punishment as disproportionate and inconsistent with fundamental principles of sporting justice. Then there is Lionel Messi. Messi was not reportedly involved in the incidents that triggered the disciplinary proceedings. But according to the source material, he later published 3 simple words in support of the sanctioned players. "We're with you." 3 words. Nothing more. But in Argentina, those words would carry enormous symbolic weight. Because Messi isn't simply another player in this story. He is the captain and the face of an entire generation. His alleged message would show that, regardless of what happened on the field, he was not prepared to simply distance himself from his teammates. Now we come to the comparison that has become impossible to ignore. Luis Suarez, Brazil, 2014. Suarez bit Giorgio Chiellini during the World Cup. It was deliberate. It was visible. And it became one of the most infamous moments in World Cup history. FIFA responded with a 9-match international suspension and a 4-month ban from football-related activities. Now compare that with what the source claims happened in 2026. Permanent international ineligibility for players involved in post-match physical confrontations. And this is where the controversy becomes explosive. The argument is not that the incidents should have been ignored. They shouldn't. Physical aggression after a match is unacceptable. But the question is whether the punishment is proportionate. If one of football's most notorious incidents resulted in 9 international matches, why would another physical confrontation result in a punishment that could end a player's international career forever? That is the question Argentina's supporters are expected to take to the appeal process. And then another comparison enters the debate. The 2006 World Cup final. Zinedine Zidane, Marco Materazzi, a headbutt, one of the most famous acts of aggression ever seen in a World Cup final. Zidane received a 3-match suspension. Again, the point isn't to excuse anyone's behavior. The point is consistency. If FIFA has historically used suspensions measured in matches or months for serious incidents, what legal reasoning would allow a post-match confrontation to become a permanent international ban? FIFA would have to explain that difference. And then comes another major issue: the alleged difference in treatment between Argentine players and Spanish captain Gavi. According to the source material, Gavi was present during the same confrontation and appeared in footage connected to the incident. His name was allegedly mentioned during the initial investigation. Yet when the final disciplinary decisions were reportedly published, the story claims that he received no comparable punishment, no suspension, no fine, no warning. If that account is correct, the question becomes unavoidable. Why? Was the evidence different? Was his involvement legally different? Was there another explanation? Or were different standards applied to different players? Those questions should be answered through evidence and official documents, not emotion. Because the most serious allegation in this entire story isn't simply that FIFA punished Argentina. It's that FIFA may have treated players involved in the same broader incident differently. And if that allegation cannot be explained, the controversy becomes much larger than football. There is another legal question at the center of the appeal. What exactly does FIFA's disciplinary code allow? If one provision establishes a minimum suspension for aggression, what additional legal mechanism could transform that punishment into permanent international ineligibility? Was there an aggravating circumstance? Was there a previous disciplinary history? Was there evidence of serious injury? Was there a broader pattern of misconduct? Or was the permanent element based on another section of the regulations? Those details matter. Without them, comparisons between cases become almost impossible. And this is precisely why the Court of Arbitration for Sport could become so important. The CAS has previously modified FIFA sanctions when procedural problems or proportionality issues were established. One case frequently discussed in football's legal history is the Paul Pogba case. When a severe sanction was imposed, the eventual legal outcome was significantly reduced. The important lesson is simple. A governing body must follow its own rules. And if the original procedure contains a serious legal error, an appeal body can intervene. That is why the timing of any Argentine appeal could become critical. According to the source material, the legal team has only a limited period to challenge the decision. If the internal avenues have been exhausted, the next stage could involve the Court of Arbitration for Sport. And that is where the argument over proportionality could become decisive. Because there is a broader principle involved. Can a private sporting organization permanently end an athlete's international career because of misconduct that occurs after a match? If the answer is yes, under what conditions? What evidence must exist? What safeguards must be provided? How severe must the conduct be? These questions go far beyond Argentina. They could affect every national team in world football. Today it could be Argentina. Tomorrow it could be Brazil, France, Spain, England, any team, any player, any controversial incident. And that is why the legal outcome could ultimately become more important than the original disciplinary case. But there is another emotional dimension that cannot be ignored. Argentina's World Cup journey. According to the source material, Argentina defeated England in the semifinal on July 15, 2026. Those same players who were celebrating victory would later find themselves facing international suspensions. The images from Atlanta became part of the wider controversy. A flag, a confrontation, a series of incidents, and eventually a disciplinary investigation. None of that excuses physical aggression. Doesn't. But understanding the emotional environment helps explain why supporters reacted so strongly. For Argentine fans, the national team isn't simply 11 players on a football pitch. It represents identity, history, family, memory, and millions of people who have spent their entire lives following the same shirt. That is why the alleged punishment has created such an emotional reaction. Argentina isn't supposedly crying because it lost a match. The argument is that Argentina is crying because players who spent years building the national team's identity could now be prevented from representing their country during the most important years of their careers. And that distinction is enormous. Player can lose a final. He can lose a semifinal. He can miss a penalty. He can have the worst performance of his career. But eventually there is another tournament, another opportunity, another World Cup. A permanent international ban removes that possibility completely. And that is why 3 images now summarize this entire controversy. The first is Gianni Infantino praising Argentina and its football culture, followed only weeks later by the alleged disciplinary action. The second is Paredes receiving the official notification and potentially realizing that the shirt he spent his career fighting for could be taken away from him. The third is the alleged difference in treatment between players involved in the same incident. One group punished, another reportedly left without comparable sanctions. If those facts are confirmed by official documents, FIFA will have some extremely difficult questions to answer. And the biggest question is simple. Was the punishment actually based on the evidence and the disciplinary code? Or were other factors involved? Because if a permanent ban cannot survive comparison with FIFA's own previous disciplinary cases, then the appeal process could become extremely important. The Court of Arbitration for Sport may ultimately have to determine whether the sanctions were proportionate, procedurally valid, and consistent with FIFA's own regulations. And if the sanctions are overturned or reduced, this entire case could become a landmark moment in modern sports law. But if the decision stands, the consequences could be enormous. Imagine Argentina entering the 2030 World Cup qualifying cycle without some of its most experienced players. No Paredes, no Emiliano Martinez, no Lisandro Martinez, no Molina, no Enzo Fernandez. A generation of players suddenly removed from international competition. And then imagine having to explain why one player was permanently banned while another player involved in the same broader incident received no comparable punishment. That is the question supporters will continue asking. Was this justice? Was it excessive? Was it simply FIFA finally drawing a line after years of controversy? Or was Argentina made an example of? Right now, those questions remain at the center of the story. The final answer will depend on the official disciplinary documents, the evidence presented, the legal arguments from AFA, and ultimately the decision of the relevant appeal authorities. But one thing is certain. This isn't just about 10 footballers. It's about the limits of sporting power. It's about consistency. It's about due process. And it's about whether the same rules truly apply to everyone. If the appeal succeeds, this could become one of the biggest reversals in modern football discipline. If it fails, Argentina could enter the next World Cup cycle with a dramatically weakened generation. Either way, the consequences will go far beyond one World Cup final. So now I want to hear from you. Do you believe FIFA's alleged punishment is justified? Should physical aggression after a match result in a permanent international ban? Or has the punishment gone far beyond what FIFA has imposed in comparable cases? Justice or revenge? Tell me your answer in the comments. And if this video gave you information you haven't heard elsewhere, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because if an appeal is filed, the next chapter of this story could be even bigger than the first. This is where football stops being just a game and becomes a question of power, rules, and accountability.